morning, everybody, and welcome to another exciting program with us here at Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants. My name is Jesse. I'm your virtual adventure guide for the day, and a big welcome to all you amazing teachers for joining us for the first time, for joining us again. We've got a great audience from across North America today, so a big thank you for continuing to support us as we showcase and celebrate the coolest scientists and explorers around planet Earth. Now, I'm excited today for two extra reasons. Number one, we are welcoming back one of my all-time favorite scientists, Dr. Matt Borths at the Duke Lemur Centre. Duke Lemur Centre has been partnering with us for 40-plus broadcasts over the last 2 years. They are an amazing organization that helps rescue, rehabilitate lemurs. They do amazing research in Madagascar, which we're going to talk about a little bit today, and you can check out all sorts of the work they do at lemur.duke.edu, and I really encourage you to check that out when we're done the broadcast. Now, we've got an audience across North America today, but I'm also really happy, as I was saying before we went live, because we have like my hometown community school right down the street from where I grew up at Kingsview Village. So Mr. N's class, welcome in, guys. So nice to have you live with us, and I'm excited for your enthusiasm and all your questions. Now, without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Borths to talk about his expedition searching in caves in Madagascar for fossil giant lemurs. If there's a more Indiana Jones metal science story than that, I don't know what it is. He's also got one of the best backdrops ever, so I'm really excited to welcome back Matt. You are now in the broadcast. Nice to see you, man, and thanks for joining us.
It is really wonderful to be back with you guys, and really excited to see all of the classes that are part of this. And so I'm going to give my presentation, but I'm also going to leave plenty of time for questions at the end. So as we're going through, I know that I speak quickly, and also that I can't see every class and every student's hand. So know that I'm going to stop, and we'll have a chance for everybody to chime in. And so with that, I'm going to tell you why I go into caves looking for giant lemurs, because that's a very specific thing to do. And so I think it requires some explanation for why that happens.
Matt, while you do that, I just wanted to note the screen share that was up is now off. So if you want to bring that guy back up, and I'll let you know when you're good to go. But I was confused. I mean, I haven't been in any caves, and if I did go into one, I wouldn't necessarily be looking for giant fossil lemurs. This is very exciting. Perfect. You are pretty much all set.
So I'm going to start right here.
Perfect. I'm in the background. You are good to go, man.
Okay. So like Jesse said, I'm speaking to you from the Duke Lemur Centre, which is at Duke University. And that is a place in Durham, North Carolina. So this is a map where we're zooming out from the forests of the Duke Lemur Centre to kind of get us situated, because a big part of what I'm going to be talking about today is a lot about where we are and when we are on the globe. And so to get us oriented, this is where I am right now, is kind of in the middle of the state of North Carolina. And North Carolina is on the east coast of the United States. We're kind of along the Atlantic Ocean. And here at the Duke Lemur Centre, we have something that you don't often find in North Carolina, and that is lemurs. This is a ringtail lemur, and ringtail lemurs are probably like the most famous of the lemurs. The lemurs are a group of primates. Primates are mammals like you and me, so that means they have hair, that means they give live birth, and that means they have really complicated teeth that help them for chewing and digesting things. And we all have cheeks. It's another fun fact about mammals is only mammals have cheeks, which is why you can't see an alligator or a snake give you a big cheesy smile. So ring-tailed lemurs are kind of one of many species of this whole group of primates that today, a lot of them live here in captivity at the Duke Lemur Centre. But the place where this group really got started is in a country on an island called Madagascar. And so we work with people that are in Madagascar to protect these animals, because lemurs are very, very endangered. That means there aren't very many of them left in the wild anymore. And so the Duke Lemur Centre, among many other things, partners with zoos and aquariums and with team members who are in Madagascar to understand the biology of this group of primates, this group of animals called lemurs, and to help protect them, learn about them, and hopefully help to eventually make them less endangered. And so here at the Lemur Centre, we have ring-tailed lemurs, which you may have seen if you've gone to a zoo and seen a lemur before, but there's lots of other species of lemur. So there's the ring-tailed lemur, there's mongoose lemurs, so they're kind of gray with these like red ruffs along their ears. There's the blue-eyed black lemurs, which all of these are about the size of like a large cat or a small dog. But because they're primates, they're really good at climbing in trees. As you can see in this cockerel shafak, which is another kind of lemur, it's grabbing onto that branch with its feet and its hands because just like us, lemurs have opposable thumbs. That means their thumbs can kind of wrap on and help grab onto things in a way that if you have a pet like a dog or a cat, you might have noticed that they can't grab onto things very well with their hands. And that's because they don't have these opposable thumbs. Being able to grab stuff using our thumbs is kind of a primate superpower. And it's an important one that has let lemurs become a really diverse group of animals that lives in the trees of Madagascar primarily. And so things like the cockerel shafak, which are among my favorite lemurs that we have at the Lemur Center and that live in Madagascar, because they basically have springs built into their legs and they can jump for dozens of feet in one bound. Now, the other thing we have at the Lemur Center, we have about 200 living lemurs that we do non-invasive research on, we observe, and we help to produce kind of larger families so that we can help these different species survive. We also have a museum at the Lemur Center. And the reason we have a museum is to understand the biology of lemurs, to understand where they came from, what kind of food they like, and how they're related to other groups of animals like us, because we are primates with opposable thumbs. Lemurs are primates with opposable thumbs. There's other animals that are part of the primate family tree, so things like baboons and things like chimpanzees and things like macaques, which are a type of monkey. All of those are part of our family tree. And we want to understand how is a gorilla related to a human, related to a lemur. And so what we can do is go to a natural history museum. We have one of these collections here at the Lemur Center where we collect bones and fossils of many kinds of animals, but we especially focus on primates and we focus on the relatives of lemurs. So we have thousands of specimens that we store in drawers like this. It's basically a library of science where every specimen that we collect is given a number and we know exactly where it is in the collection. We're then visited by researchers from all over the world who can check out these fossils and study them to understand our connection to the wider tree of life, but especially our connection to animals like lemurs. And in this image, you can see there's little yellow dots on the boxes for lots of these specimens. Those yellow dots mean that the specimen has been scanned and we have a 3D model of it that lives on a website called Morphosource. And Morphosource is something that anyone can go visit at any time. And you can type in a word like Egyptopithecus, which is an extinct primate that we have in this collection. In fact, it's this one right here. And you can download this face and take a look at this in 3D space. And what that lets us do is share our collection with everybody around the world really, really easily. So that's a really important part of what we do at the Lemur Center is make all of the research that we do here available to people all over the world. And so we also go out and we expand our collection. So we collect new fossils. We have fossil projects that are all over the world. So we have a project in Wyoming where actually the roots of the primate story get started. And so this is a block of specimens that we have that we collected in Western North America. But eventually we have to get those animals both out of the rock and understand how they get to Madagascar. And so this is a video going into our fossil preparation lab. And our fossil prep lab is where we actually take specimens out of the rock to study them. And so we'll be seeing a lot of specimens as we go through this tour of animals that are covered in rocks. We have to get them out to actually study them. And I should say that the person who does that is Carrie Whitman. I'm going to introduce you to real quick. This is Carrie. Carrie is our fossil preparator and also someone who's going to pop up a lot in the video that I'm going to show you because Carrie is an expert in many things in Madagascar.
Amazing. Hey, Carrie.
Hi. Good to see you.
Nice to see you.
And so she just came in and I wanted to make sure, because acknowledging that Carrie is a really important part of the team, along with all these specimens we have in our collection and this whole expedition that I'm going to be telling you about today I'm just one person who happens to be here telling you this story, but there are dozens of people who are involved in all of these projects. Science isn't something that happens by just one person having a really good idea. It's something that happens with lots of people with lots of ideas working together and helping each other to answer big questions like, where do lemurs come from? And how did they get to Madagascar? And what has been happening to them over the last couple of centuries? How did they become endangered species? And so in order to answer those questions about Madagascar, we have to leave North America. We have this amazing fossil collection here, and we have the living lemurs at the Lemur Center. But in order to really understand the story of primates and of lemurs, we have to go from the United States to the country of Madagascar. Now, Madagascar is all the way across the Atlantic Ocean. So we're going to fly over the ocean. It's on the other side of the continent of Africa, just off the east coast. And so Madagascar is an island. And when we think of islands, we think of them as being kind of small things. But Madagascar is basically a small continent that broke off from the side of Africa. You can actually see kind of to the side of Africa, there's like a little chunk out of the side of Africa where Madagascar fits. And that makes a lot of sense because Madagascar used to be part of the larger continent of Africa, which was then part of this supercontinent where a whole bunch of things were put together called Gondwana. And over the last couple of hundreds of millions of years, all the continents have been breaking apart, and Madagascar has drifted off the east coast of Africa to become its own thing. And by becoming its own thing, animals that have gotten to the island of Madagascar have become really, really diverse on this massive island continent. And one of the groups of animals that made it from Africa to Madagascar are the lemurs. And so in order to start this expedition, we had to meet up with our team members at the University of Antananarivo. And Antananarivo is the capital of Madagascar. So just like Ottawa is the capital of Canada and Washington, D.C. is the capital of the United States, Antananarivo is the capital of Madagascar. And it's there that there's a really big university that has fossils from the early parts of the story of Madagascar. And so it's kind of zooming in the university from above. And I should say that Madagascar and Antananarivo is a really massive city. And it kind of blankets the hills that surround this area. And it's a really amazing place to go. And the fossils that are at the university are really spectacular. So today I'm talking mostly about the lemur part of the fossil record, but there's also dinosaurs from Madagascar. There's really early reptiles. Really, the fossil record of Madagascar is amazing, just like the fossil record found in all kinds of parts of the world are really amazing. And what we do as paleontologists is try to take pieces of information from Madagascar and pieces of information from South Africa and pieces of information from France and the United States and try to put together this kind of global story of how groups of animals moved around the planet, how they diversified into all of the species that we see today. And while dinosaurs are really amazing creatures to me, I've always been in love with dinosaurs as a paleontologist. What I'm really interested in right now is the much more recent part of what we can learn from the fossil record. So what we know, I'm actually going to stop sharing this video, and I'm going to introduce you to some of the creatures that lived, that are part of the Madagascar fossil record, that only went extinct a couple of centuries ago. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, Jesse, so I can be like more full screen presenting things.
You're back.
I'm here. And so what I want to show you is some of the specimens that are over my shoulder. I'm standing now in our exhibit space at the Duke Lemur Centre. And this animal right here, nope, over here, I'm mirrored, is an animal called Paleopropithecus. And Paleopropithecus is called the sloth lemur. And it's called a sloth lemur for maybe pretty obvious reasons. It is a lemur that could hang by its hands and its feet just like a sloth. And it would move through the trees very carefully. And probably based on the way its teeth are put together and what we've learned about the way its bones are put together, this is an animal that really likes to eat leaves. And so it's an amazing creature, and it's huge. It's about the size of a golden retriever. And that is much, much bigger than any lemur that is alive today. Next to Paleopropithecus is one of the smaller lemurs. This is an animal called a dwarf lemur, or a giant mouse lemur, excuse me. And the giant mouse lemur is still alive today and is a really important part of its ecosystem. Now, what's kind of amazing is when you look at these two animals, you can see the mouse lemur has white bones. And so we see white bones in a natural history collection that usually tells us we're dealing with something that died very recently. Like the white bone means it hasn't really been fossilized. And when we look at Paleopropithecus, that is like brown bones. And when we see dark bones like that, we usually think fossil. We think ancient. We think of artifacts and things that are found in the ground. And it's true that Paleopropithecus is a really old specimen, but it's not as old as something like a dinosaur bone. Paleopropithecus, we think, only went extinct in the last 500 years. The bones of Paleopropithecus have been found in river deposits and cave deposits in Madagascar, alongside the bones of things like mouse lemurs. We also have specimens from the fossil record of Madagascar like this. This is an animal called Megalatipus. And looking at the head here, it might be kind of hard. It looks kind of like a cow a little bit, or a horse or something. It's got these big fangs up front that make it maybe look like a predator. But in fact, what this creature is a lemur. The way that we know it's a lemur is because primates have an adaptation on them that is basically this ring of bone that goes all the way around our eyeballs. You can feel that on your own eye. If you kind of like gently push along the side of your cheek, you can feel that there's bone going all the way around your eye. If you were a super intelligent raccoon, or if you were a super intelligent squirrel and you try to do this, it gets squishy over here because you don't have bone going all the way around your eye if you're any other mammal except for a primate. And so when Megalatipus was found, they immediately knew they were dealing with a primate because it has this ring of bone going all the way around its eyeball. And so then what's going on with these teeth? They're big pointy teeth that looks like something that eats meat, and there aren't primates that eat meat except really us and some chimpanzees sometimes. And so this animal isn't using its teeth for hunting. It's using its teeth probably for social signaling. When you think about what these teeth in the front are really for, those are the things that animals that have complicated social behaviors will kind of show off when they want to signal to other members of their group. And so even in hunting animals, things like dogs, if a dog isn't very happy with what you're doing, it might show its teeth in the front. And that kind of pulling back the teeth and kind of showing off its teeth is a social signal and a communication style that these animals are probably also using. So it tells us that, like many other primates, Megalatipus was a social animal that was using its teeth to signal to other Megalatipus. So this Megalatipus is a gorilla-sized lemur that lived in Madagascar. And the thing that's really crazy is a gorilla-sized lemur living alongside animals like Paleopropithecus only went extinct in the last couple of centuries, maybe the last like 500 years again. And so there were these giant lemurs living in Madagascar. Madagascar already has incredible biodiversity that includes over 100 species of lemur that live on the island. There were even more species living there, and they were really big. And so what I'm curious about when I think about Madagascar and I think about this fossil record is what happened. Why did these animals go extinct, and where did they go extinct? What kinds of environmental changes might have happened that caused these animals to not be able to survive anymore? And how did humans interact with these animals? Because what's really amazing is we have an archaeological record from Madagascar that suggests that humans and these giant lemurs overlapped with each other for a very long time. And so how did they live together? And then eventually, why did these giant lemurs eventually go extinct? And the place that we go to understand very, very recent fossil history is caves. And so I'm going to pull up another presentation, show you a little bit about, let's see.
As you're doing that, I'll just note, those are some spectacular fossils. I don't think I've ever seen a Megalatipus skull before. That is ridiculous. I've seen pictures. Huge. I've never, like, the scale is wild.
Yes, it is. I mean, like lemurs, I always describe lemurs as basically like cat monkeys. Like they're kind of like small, like they're fuzzy. They're really, I think they're really cute. But they're about the size of like a cat. And so imagining something that was that big, it's like saying there were rabbits that were the size of gorillas, like that they were, and they're so, I don't know. I think about when we go into the fossil record, there's lots of big things. Dinosaurs were gigantic and like woolly mammoths were huge. And but those animals went extinct a really, really long time ago.
Yep.
These are animals that the Great Wall of China was being built when Megalatipus was still alive is amazing to me.
It is amazing. It's really, I'm excited to keep diving in, but like, I want this to be really driven into our kids' heads today. Like, it's quite incredible to think that in the not too distant past, really not too distant past, there were even more incredible megafauna on this planet. I mean, we all think of elephants and whales, and we have some incredible species, but there were so many more of them in so many more places. And again, the work that Dr. Borths is doing and scientists all around the world is to understand why that happened and what role we might have played. And so I'm going to let him dive in, but it's just something worth thinking about.
Yeah. And this is part of what we do when we study fossils. We're trying to understand like all these, like, just how does the animal move? What did it eat? Like, it's just like, there's a lot of things we find in the fossil record that we wouldn't have made up because our imagination, like we make up dragons, we make up unicorns, but it's like a horse with a horn on its head. Like that, imagining a lemur the size of a gorilla is something that I don't think I would have had the imagination to conceive of until there was a fossil that showed, yes, there was this giant lemur that lived in Madagascar. And so if we want to find out more about animals that went extinct in Madagascar, we have to go look for them. And paleontology isn't just kind of the act of like going out your back door and just like seeing if you find any bones outside. Paleontology is part of a larger science called geology, which is the science of studying rocks. Because really fossils are found associated with rocks or in rocks. And in some cases, fossils are basically just like part of the rock. Like it's actually like, there'll be sandstone, we call sandstone, and it's a rock. And then in it, we find fossils that are deposited along with grains of sand. Like it's all kind of like mixed together. And so paleontologists are really a very specialized branch of geology. And a really important tool that geologists use is geological maps. And so this is a geological map of the country of Madagascar. And when you look at this, it looks like kind of this tie-dye splotches of color. As a geologist, I look at this and I recognize these different colors tell me what kind of rock I'm looking at on the island and how old that rock is. The brighter the color, the more likely it is a volcanic rock. So something that came from volcanoes or under the kind of the caldera, the base where like magma was moving through and kind of creating the continents. And so for instance, on this map, you can see along the right side, along the east coast of Madagascar, are these really bright red blotches. And those bright red blotches of color are basically from when Madagascar ripped away from the continent that was India. India was actually connected to the eastern part of Madagascar, broke away, and then eventually moved all the way across the Indian Ocean and then ran into the continent of Asia. And all of those red blotches are basically like the remnants of the volcanoes that like popped up as two massive continents were peeling apart from each other. And so when I look at this map, like fossils are not often found in volcanoes because the animals' remains are going to get burned up really quick if they're associated with that. And so we want to find different kinds of rock. The lighter colors that we see on here are going to be sedimentary rocks. Sedimentary rock is rock that's laid down by water. And where there's water, there's life. And often when we find fossils, we find them in sedimentary rocks. And so looking at this map, there's lots of light yellow kind of right through the middle. And that is great fossil hunting country. Along the western side of Madagascar, you see this blue stripe that kind of goes from the northern part of Madagascar all the way down the west coast. All of that blue, that color and time period and shade, tells me that that is rock from the time of the dinosaurs and the beginning of the age of mammals. And that rock was deposited in shallow seas. It's called limestone. And limestone is a really amazing place where you can find fossils from shallow marine environments. But the other kind of superpower that limestone has is it does not last for very long. When it's exposed to the surface, so limestone starts its life with life. A lot of limestone is actually created from tiny microorganisms, things like basically like plankton that live in shallow seas. When they die, their shells basically rain down out of the water and are deposited along the bottom of the ocean. And they create layers. And as more and more layers of shells build up, it smushes and smushes and smushes, and they get really compacted and eventually become rock. Well, in Madagascar, that rock from the shallow sea during these big continental uplifts, as Madagascar is colliding with other continents and moving, it kind of like rolled over a little bit. And it exposed what was once the bed of a shallow sea up above the ground. And so now the rock is exposed to the surface. So the limestone being exposed to the surface is then also going to be exposed to things like rain. It's going to be exposed to rivers that are going through. And limestone is very, very slightly chemically basic, which means when it hits an acid, it's going to dissolve. Rainwater is very, 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 very slightly acidic. And so when rainwater and groundwater hit limestone, it can dissolve that limestone just a little bit. And so when lots of water piles up, especially moving through the ground in limestone, it can make tunnels, like actually like basically like chambers that go and like erode out of the limestone. And that erosion is actually what creates caves. Caves are just these tunnels of water that form in limestone where the erosion of the surface eventually hits one of these chambers, exposing this tunnel to the surface, and then people can get in. So the definition of a cave is literally a place where a person can get into one of these tunnels in the ground in limestone. And so the water table sometimes will drop, like as rivers move and as rain patterns change, as the continents move, the water can kind of go other places, leaving behind these dry or kind of damp chambers that we call caves. So these caves exposed to the surface then become very convenient places for animals to hang out. So we have this, people like to live in caves. Like when you think about ancient human history, sometimes we call ancient humans cavemen. And the reason we do that is because people like to live in caves. Caves have a pretty constant temperature. So if it's a really, really hot day, the cave is usually going to be cooler relative to being outside in the open air. And during the winter, it retains a little bit of heat. And so if it's cold, you can go into a cave and stay a little warmer. And so humans know that this is a trick. If you find a cave and you want to survive through the winter, you want to hunker down. Or if you want to get cool in the summer, you want to go into a cave. But other animals know that too. Lemurs know that, and a lot of the other animals that live alongside them. And so these caves become places that we can find fossils. Those fossils are not from the ancient seaway where the limestone was originally deposited. Instead, they're from kind of after all of the limestone has been exposed to the surface and plants and animals get deposited in these basically pockets in the ground. And they become little time capsules because caves, once they're exposed, they erode out, they don't last very long. A cave can really only kind of support itself for a couple thousand years before eventually like the roof and everything kind of collapses on itself. And so you get these bubbles of time capsules that are sprinkled across the landscape. And so what we want to do, going to Madagascar, is we want to find caves where animals have been deposited because it's going to tell us about what's happened on that landscape in the very recent past. So in order to understand the extinction of animals in the recent past, we want to go into these caves. And so part of this project is teaming up with a group of cave divers, which is an amazing group of explorers who do a very dangerous job of going into these caves using air tanks that they have very precisely calibrated, and they have watches that are very precisely calibrated to make sure that when they go down looking for fossils in these caves that sometimes still have water in them, that they're going to be okay and they're going to be able to bring those fossils to the surface. And so we're going to go back to this video and go towards the cave sites in the southern part of Madagascar. So this is the team that we met up with at the university, led by the head paleontologist at the university, Nora Mami, who's on the left here. We also worked with a researcher from the American Museum of Natural History named Yvonne. And here's Carrie, who is a key part of our team. And then we had a bunch of students who are working with us because everyone is interested in learning about the fossils that we find in Madagascar. So this is kind of our core team that we went out with to learn about what the recent past in Madagascar was like. We basically are looking for caves so we can find fossils in those caves that tell us how the landscape has changed over the last couple of centuries around that cave site. So the caves that we went to were in the far southwestern part of Madagascar. We basically drove across the Central Highlands. Madagascar is like a big upper plateau, and you come off that plateau. And along the way, you go past the people who live in Madagascar. This is a series of rice paddies. Rice is a really important crop that's raised in Madagascar, and it's also part of Carrie's research project in Madagascar, is understanding how people use the land to make rice. So going across the Central Highlands, like there are huge, beautiful mountains that are scattered across the landscape. And these mountains are all part of this like smashing of continents. It's like Africa is separating from Madagascar and India is separating from Madagascar, leaving behind basically these towers of really ancient rock. And so those are bad places to find fossils. So we didn't look for fossils between the Central Highlands and Tuliar. Instead, we came down to the southwest because it's right on the coast. And that is where we're going to find limestone. The coast between Madagascar and Africa, the body of water that goes through, is called the Mozambique Channel. In the Mozambique Channel, this was the first time I had been close to the Mozambique Channel, which is very exciting because that is the body of water that lemur relatives crossed from Africa to get to Madagascar to eventually kind of populate the island with all this amazing diversity that includes cockerel shafak and includes things like Megalatipus. And so this is the city of Tuliar, which is kind of known for these like blue and red bike taxis. But we couldn't stay for very long because we had to get to where the fossils were. And so to get to the fossils, we had to go further down the coast. And the way we get there is by taking a boat. To get to the boats, which are off the shore, we take this basically taxi that's pulled by a tractor out into the ocean to get to the boat. Then we get in the boat and we travel down to the town called Anakau. And from Anakau, we go down to the national park of Sumpitsuts. Sempetsots Lake is a big salt lake, which means there's not a lot of animals living in it. But it was formed basically right along the coastline. And there's this huge plateau that goes along the side of the lake. And that plateau is all just a big chunk of limestone. And it is just full of caves. It's basically like Swiss cheese of caves. And each of those little pockets of cave is going to tell us a different story about how this part of the world has changed over the last couple of millennia and even couple of centuries and even the last couple of decades. And so we want to find lots of caves to compare what's going on in each of them. Because today, this part of Madagascar is a very, very dry part of the world. And so this is not the dry part. This is kind of looking at the Mozambique Channel. This is the first time I have been on this body of water. And again, it's very excited. As someone from the Lemur Centre, like we talk a lot about the Mozambique Channel. Of course, it's used today by fishermen, and it's also used by whales. And so there's kind of some whale watching to be done as we went from one place to the other, which is really exciting. Madagascar is a biodiverse, like rich place. It's crazy how many species are able to live there. But we were really interested in what used to live there. And so we targeted a couple of caves that are up here on the plateau, including this sinkhole that the team has been working in for a couple of years now. So to get there, we basically transitioned through a couple of microclimates or micro ecosystems. So here we are on the coast, which is basically like a beach. Like if you've been to the Pacific or Atlantic beach, this will look very familiar, kind of scrubby forest. But then as we get closer into the plateau, things become more dry as we get further from the ocean. And basically it becomes what's called the Spiny Thicket, which is effectively a desert-like environment. It doesn't rain very much at all. And all of the plants that live in this part of Madagascar are very well adapted to living without very much water. So there's basically everything has spikes, not everything, but many of the plants have spikes. They're not cactuses though. Cactuses are a group of plants that only live in the Americas. These are plants that have converged, which is they're given the same conditions as cactuses. They live in dry places. And they evolve very similar ways of coping with that. They have similar ways of retaining water, and they have similar ways of wanting to protect themselves from animals and plants that also want to get at the water that they're protecting. So they grow things like spikes that help keep things like lemurs from coming by. And so in order to get to the cave sites, we walk through the Spiny Thicket. Some of the national park has really nice trails that have been built by the really expert team of guides and rangers that work in the national parks. But some of the cave sites we went to were not on trails. And both Carrie and I can attest to the fact that it is very hard to hike through an area called the Spiny Thicket because there are lots of spines and you want to make sure you have long sleeves. So it's a pretty hot hike, but you wanted to have like a hat, long sleeves, and pants to really protect yourself from all of these plants that are really trying to keep you from getting too close. But there are animals that are able to live in this setting. So things like ring-tailed lemurs make their home in the southwestern part of Madagascar. On the lake, there's a whole population of flamingos that are very happily making a living there, eating the brine shrimp that live in the salt lake. There's also these amazing trees called baobabs. Baobabs are found they're found in Africa, they're found in Madagascar, but the real diversity of this group is in Madagascar. And these are plants that basically like keep all of the water in their trunk. They almost look like trees that are upside down, where like the roots are sticking up in the air. But they're not. This is the right way to grow. And they are just supremely adapted to living in these kinds of conditions. There's also plants that grow gigantic burrs and spines that we got stuck on our clothing. And these kind of a close-up of these like cactus-like trees called octopus trees that have spikes that are like 5 inches long. But like I said, it's a home for everybody. And so there are animals like kua, which is a group of birds that only live in Madagascar. It's like lemurs, who are like very adapted to live there. But again, we're really interested in getting into the caves. And so from the green and diversity of the desert above us, we go below the floor of the forest into the limestone that is kind of the forest floor that's been weathered away by water. And so this is the first cave that we went into. And it was a very exciting kind of moment to be there. And we strapped on helmets because you want to make sure that you're protecting your head. Like I said, caves are very volatile structures. You can see in this image that there's like cave rock that's fallen from the ceiling. So you put on a helmet because more of the ceiling might kind of trickle down while you're exploring. And we went down to see what was down here. There's even life in the caves themselves. So this is a species of animal called a blind cave fish. And it's a fish that lives in these caves. And it's unclear how many different species there are and how these populations of fish kind of get from one cave to another. One hypothesis is a lot of these caves are connected to each other deep, deep underground. And the fish are actually able to swim from cave to cave, whereas we have to hike from cave to cave. And so this is another cave that we went to, where you can see this magnificent banyan tree that is growing along the edge. And this tree is basically the reason this cave exists. The tree, as it grows, is putting down roots looking for water down deep below the surface. And eventually it found this channel of water moving through the limestone. And so the tree started to grow and grow and grow and grow, and eventually kind of cracked rock open, creating what's a sinkhole. And sinkholes are basically just like this big opening into one of these tunnels that's moving with all this groundwater. And so this tree is a really important part of erosion. And these are the roots of this tree that are kind of dropping down into this big chamber. And it's in this water where the initial teams working in this area found some really spectacular fossils of giant lemurs and other animals that used to be part of their ecosystem. There's this one little island right in the middle of everything. The ladder was built a couple of years ago that goes straight down to this little island. And it's from there that the dive team is able to put on their equipment and paddle out into the water to collect fossils. So this is one of the members of the dive team. His name is Zach, and Zach is a professor of anthropology and also a cave diver. So this is really kind of the best of all worlds for Zach. And he's an expert at using all of this equipment to go deep underwater. I am not a cave diver, and it is a very exciting way to explore, but I'm very happy to kind of be on this end of the exploration where Zach is actually bringing up specimens that he collected from underwater in that bucket, and he's going to go out and look for more, while we sit on the surface and figure out what exactly he found. We're not entirely sure right now how all of these things got into the water. The lemurs don't like to swim. And so it's unclear how much these are animals that kind of fell from the top of the sinkhole into the water and got washed in. If the water table was lower at some point in the distant past and there were lemurs and other animals living kind of deep in the cave, and eventually the water table came back and flooded the animals, we're still trying to understand the sequence of events. But understanding that sequence of events is really important for understanding that in this box, you can kind of see a little eye bit of a skull there. That's an animal called a pachylemur. Pachylemur is extinct. It's not a giant lemur, but it's a pretty big lemur. It's related to ruffed lemurs, which is a type of lemur we have here at the Duke Lemur Centre. And there are tons of them in this deposit. And so understanding why this kind of a large lemur was so abundant and was living there only maybe like 400 years ago, but isn't there today, is a really important question that we have, because it tells us about how these species go extinct and maybe how we can reverse that a little bit. So this is another cave that we went into. This one was dry, so we didn't need cave divers to go into this. And this is an example of one that probably was flooded at some point, because one of the amazing fossils that was found in this cave is a baby horned crocodile. The horned crocodile is a animal that went extinct in Madagascar, but it lived alongside animals like this. This is the upper thigh bone of Megalatipus, the giant gorilla lemur that we found in this dry cave. And this is the first time a piece of Megalatipus had been found in this cave. So it was data that told us Megalatipus was living in this environment. And so now we want to date this specimen. We want to see if we can get any kind of genetic information out of it so we can understand where and how Megalatipus went extinct. This is an animal that used to be found all over the island of Madagascar, but eventually it must have been restricted. Its range must have gotten smaller and smaller until eventually it went extinct. And so understanding the timeline for how you restrict such an amazing animal that was spread and living in all kinds of environments. It was living in dry places, it was living in forests, it was living in grasslands, and then suddenly it's not living anywhere. Understanding how that happened is basically what we're there to do. In this cave, along with the giant Megalatipus, we found examples of the smallest lemurs that are known. This is the skull of a mouse lemur. And a mouse lemur is correctly named. It's a lemur that's about the size of a mouse, and they are very cute. All of these specimens are collected and brought back to our, basically our research center that we set up at the hotel where we were staying, where they very graciously let us spread out all these fossils. And so this is the team sorting through, trying to identify all the specimens that were found so we can figure out who's going to research what and what kinds of questions we want to answer with the material that we have. So there are tons, like literally tons of fossils, hundreds of these things. So this is all the lemur section that we found in this cave. This is the shell of a giant tortoise that is now extinct in Madagascar. It's like a 6 centimeter thick shell. This would have been kind of almost the size of like a really small car. Like this is a huge tortoise that was living in Madagascar. Again, something that went extinct in the relatively recent past. Along the way, we explored for other cave sites. So some of them, based on the geology and the surrounding environment, we thought there might be caves in an area. We would go, this was a site that we thought might be a sinkhole, turned out not to be. And so exploration isn't always about successfully finding fossils. Sometimes you don't find anything. We just found a beautiful place to get some shade in the late afternoon. But we were able to locate some new caves. Our guides, who are very familiar with the landscape, were able to show us caves that had not been registered by the research group that's been working in this area. So this is another smaller sinkhole that we decided to go into. And so with a small team, this one, because it was recently discovered, we didn't have a ladder. And so I have done some rappelling and some caving before. And so I rigged up a rope and was able to go down. This is being recorded by Carrie, who was at the top to make sure that everything was safe. Because an important part of this kind of exploration is not just having a team for the science, but having a team for safety reasons. And so Carrie was at the surface in case I needed anything or anything went wrong. And fortunately, it all went well. And so I was able to go into this cave and explore for fossils. And it was there's Carrie kind of sitting at the top, making sure that I'm not being an idiot and that I haven't broken any limbs. And so once I got in the cave, I turned on my camera because I wanted to document exactly what I was seeing, and almost immediately found a turtle shell. This is the shell of an animal called a radiated tortoise, which is a small tortoise that lives in Madagascar. It lives in the southwestern part, and it's part of the reason why the national park of Sempitsuts was established in the first place. It's because it has one of the largest populations of this tortoise around. But it's a tortoise that used to be found in many other parts of the island. So this is maybe an example of an animal that hasn't gone fully extinct yet, but has been restricted as the environment has changed around it. So finding another tortoise shell right there's a fragmentary one, there's a more complete one that I found when I dropped into this cave, can tell us a little bit about how these animals ultimately got restricted. Do we see some kind of genetic restriction going on? Are they changing their bodies? Are they getting smaller? Are they getting bigger? How are these populations changing? And so this kind of looking around in the cave is an important part of the exploration that I was there to do. And as we're getting closer on time, because I had some technical difficulties, I'm going to skip ahead a little bit to the final cave site that we went into, where we worked with a dive team again. So this was one where, again, we're hiking across, there's no trail. And this cave site turned out to be really difficult to find. We actually had some GPS coordinates because another dive team had gone in a couple of years, almost a decade ago. And they had documented that there were fossils in the cave, but they couldn't collect those fossils because in order to collect fossils in Madagascar, you need permission from the government to collect them, which is a really important part of fossil collecting, is making sure that the people whose land you are on are aware of what you're doing and the scientific questions that you want to answer. And so they had gone into the cave, they had permission to do that, but they didn't have permission to collect anything. And so they came out and said, hey, there's a bunch of fossils in this cave, including horned crocodile specimens, which is really exciting. And we wanted to go check it out. We almost didn't find it because the cave entrance itself was a well, basically. The site had been used by people before to collect water. And it was a very small entrance that the cave diver and I rigged up a rappel to get into this thing. And it was barely big enough for all of his equipment. We actually had to send his tanks down separate from him. And then I went in after him to kind of act like support. So Carrie was at the top, then I was in the middle, and then Jake is the name of the cave diver, was in the water. And so we had kind of a relay system to make sure that everybody was safe and communicating the whole time. And so Jake got to the bottom of the rope and basically set off into the water immediately. kind of leaving me behind in the dark with the bats, perched on a little chunk of rock, waiting to see if Jake would find this kind of magical fossil chamber that had been described. And after a few minutes, he came up with exactly what we were hoping for. There was a skull of the horned crocodile that surfaced with him. Now we had to get it out of the cave, which was a very delicate process. And the bottom of the cave floor was very squishy, and the specimen was very, very, very delicate. And so it took us a while to figure out the best way to do this. It involved some grocery bags and some Tupperware to actually get these things out. And eventually we did. So this is the skull. It's not complete anymore. It's not all in one piece because reptile specimens, reptile skulls don't kind of suture themselves together the way that mammal skulls do. And so like dinosaur skulls and alligator skulls will fall apart really easily. And so we weren't too frustrated that it fell apart as we brought it to the surface because we had all of the pieces of this magnificent animal, including this kind of front of the jaw that was just gorgeous. And this horned crocodile has these almost like Tyrannosaurus-like flattened teeth that would have made it a very dangerous predator for any Megalatipus that went down to get a drink. We also found parts of its skeleton, and in the same chamber, we found a baby giant lemur. This is another kind of lemur called Mesopropithecus. So it's related, it's a sloth lemur. It's like a smaller sloth lemur. And there are basically no other examples of a baby skull of this animal. And the way we know it was a baby is when we flipped it over, we could actually see kind of its adult teeth starting to erupt. So if anyone in the audience has lost any of their teeth, that's as you grow up, you get adult teeth that come in. That's something that happens in lemurs too. And we can use that to figure out how old these baby lemurs are that we find. And so then the team was able to kind of celebrate all the amazing fossil discoveries that we had. And now I'm excited to share it all with you. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And I know that that ran a little bit longer than I anticipated, but I am happy to answer any questions that you have. And like I said, I also have Carrie here, who's here to answer questions.
Hey, Carrie.
Sure. Again, it's not just me.
No, I will note, first of all, that I let that go way longer than I normally would because I'm a sucker for Madagascar stories, and that was super cool. And some of the imagery in that was some of the coolest stuff we've ever had in a broadcast ever. Some of our classes have had to go to lunch and do other things. And so what I've told them to do...
Okay.
No, honestly, like, I was going to stop and I was like, no, this is just so endlessly beautiful. We've got to keep it going. Our classes have agreed they're really keen to share questions after the fact. I will get you those in an email. We'll make sure that all our classes have the chance to get those queries answered. But honestly, that was such an incredible expedition. Kudos to the both of you. If you ever need an education assistant, I will be there. I'll lower any tank into the pit. But we had some really fantastic classes again. Washington State, Ontario, Quebec, Alberta, Massachusetts, and more today. I really encourage our classes. Check out the Duke Lemur Centre website. I'll make sure all our registered groups have all the links to the paleontology department and all the fantastic stuff that you guys do, because this is really, really special. And we will have you back on as soon as you're willing to talk more about this. With as many kids
I will be more efficient in my storytelling.
Honestly, this is totally fine, guys. Thank you both so much. I'm sorry we can't do a big Q&A, but I will say fare thee well. Stick around after we're done live, but we'll end it there live for everyone. Have a wonderful day, classes, and we'll see you all